Mark, a real pleasure talking to you again, sir. Thanks very much for joining us.
Sure, nice to be here anytime.
Unfortunately, it's another one of these stories. I think the last time we were talking, it was about your client, Jonathan Ryan, last year, who was arrested after he drove up from Florida to help his girlfriend move. He had a gun in the car, and ultimately, your client, what happened to your client? He was acquitted, right?
He was acquitted at trial in about 30 minutes.
And now we've got another case here. 39-year-old Meredith Graves is a medical student from Tennessee. She was apparently driving into New York to go to some job interviews, stopped off at the World Trade Center Memorial, saw a no guns allowed sign. She didn't realize that she couldn't carry in New York City, so she went up to a security guard and said, I have a gun here. Is there a place where I can store it? Instead, she was arrested, and now she's facing 3 years in prison.
Yeah, 3.5 is the minimum, or if she gets indicted, that is, then most likely the best that she'll be able to do is 2 if she is in fact indicted, which at least the perspective from the article that I read today was that that's what they're intending to do, assuming that happens.
You know, obviously, there's a little bit of a backdrop to this in that Mayor Bloomberg not only was the guy who was pushing for that 3.5-year mandatory minimum sentence, which you have to admit is not being applied across the board. There are still plenty of individuals, in some cases with lengthy criminal records, who are caught in illegal possession of a firearm who aren't getting the 3.5 years, right?
It doesn't appear to be applied evenly, that's for sure. And I suppose the frustrating part as an attorney in New York is clearly this is not the purpose of the law. I mean, it is the law, technically speaking, but it's hard to believe that the legislature would envision a scenario where a 39-year-old medical student who comes to New York for a job interview and has a valid permit from out of state, makes a mistake, brings it to New York, actually tries to check the weapon rather than conceal it. It's hard to envision a scenario where any legislator in the state of New York said, that's a great case for 3.5 years in a state prison.
Well, but, one of the things that Mayor Bloomberg has been arguing against right now on the national level is a piece of federal legislation that passed the House, H.R. 822, the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act of 2011. And if that bill had become law, Ms. Graves would not have to worry about going to prison for 3 years. She would have had reciprocity in the state of New York. I don't know if there would have been any sort of storage facilities for her firearms there at the memorial, but she certainly wouldn't be facing a prison term.
No, I mean, there's certainly political issues that attach to this, and, this has been a hot potato up here for a period of time. And, even in the recent news in New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the police officer who was murdered a few weeks ago, and so certainly it's not a good political climate for somebody like the doctor from Tennessee to deal with, that's for sure.
You say it's not a good political climate, but at the same time, I'd like to think that people can see the difference between this woman, Meredith Graves, and the felon who is believed to be responsible for the death of Officer Fagosky.
I agree, and that's what makes this just a complete head-scratcher, is prosecutors possess a very powerful weapon. It's called discretion. And, I mean, I think we have to be careful and see how this plays out before drawing any specific conclusions about how they're handling it. But certainly, if they follow the natural chain of events, which would result in her going to prison and equating her to somebody who shot a police officer in the face, then obviously that's ridiculous. But the concern, and this happens in a lot of cases, is just that the law may recognize this in New York as technically criminal, but in the real world, and applying discretion, which is something that should be happening in every one of these cases, this woman is clearly not a criminal, and the idea of jeopardizing her liberty, her career, her reputation, and everything else that goes with that for what may amount to making a mistake, it's just not appropriate. And one would like to believe that the mayor and everyone else would recognize that, including everyone else involved in the criminal justice system. It's not just a Mayor Bloomberg issue.
Right.
Just setting up a chain of events which is going to subject this woman to facing years in a New York State prison when she should be in New York 6 months from now practicing medicine. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Now, let me ask you about your client last year. You said that the jury acquitted him in half an hour, which is, that's lightning fast in a jury trial. What do you think was so compelling to the jury that they got it, that they understood that this isn't a crime that somebody should be going away for, 3 years for?
Well, factually, the cases, at least as I understand the new one, are very different. The law requires that you knowingly possess a loaded firearm in the state of New York. In that particular case, you may or may not recall, Mr. Ryan purchased a gun years before and basically threw it in the glove compartment where it sat unused, unthought of, on anything for a period of years, and he came up to New York to help his girlfriend. And the argument presented to the jury in that case was that he didn't even know he had it with him. He never consciously appreciated or was aware of it, and that was a successful defense. He testified. He was very earnest and believed, and he was acquitted promptly, as he should have been. It's a case that you and I probably both agree, it just never should have been brought. In this particular case, it's a different issue. Clearly, again, technically speaking, she knew she had it because she said, "Where's my gun?"
Mm-hmm.
So this is a case that's potentially more dangerous. It calls for discretion as opposed to just saying we have a technical violation and you should be held accountable for it. So these kinds of cases are even more dangerous than Mr. Ryan's case.
Well, I guess she's back in court, due in court anyway, on March 19th, so we will keep following the story. In the meantime, Mark, obviously anybody traveling to New York City who's a gun owner, they need to be aware of what the city's gun laws are.
They do, and there's one other thing that I was thinking about earlier, just in reading this in the paper, and it's kind of ironic, it's unfortunate. They have gun amnesty days here in New York where they encourage any street thug who has an actual illegal weapon to come into the precinct, no questions asked. God knows where they got a gun. God knows what's been done with it. And they pay these people money, no questions asked. They take the gun. They never get prosecuted for doing who knows what. Yet somebody like this who's about to become a doctor simply makes an honest mistake, is otherwise responsible, comes here, and they want to throw her in prison. That's just a strange way to live.
It absolutely is, Mark. You got to wonder about the priorities there.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I really appreciate you joining us, sir. Hope we can talk to you again soon.
Sure, anytime.
Mark Betterow, New York attorney, joining us here on NRAnews.com and Sirius XM Patriot.